Welcome to F-Bomb Friday. I'm your host, Tracy Preston, along with my husband, Todd. Hey, hon.
Hey, baby.
Are you ready?
I am ready.
Let's hit it. Winter has always had a way of changing Michigan. The same forests that hum with life in the summer fall silent beneath the snow. Rivers slow. Roads disappear beneath snowdrifts. And the small towns scattered across the state seem to shrink inward as families gather around wood stoves to keep warm, their lanterns burning bright, telling stories of old. Today on F-Bomb Friday, we lace up our skates, step out onto the frozen waters of Hickory Creek, and chase one of Michigan's strangest winter legends. This is the story of the Phantom Skater. Michigan winters have always produced stories. Some are about survival, some are about tragedy, and some are about things that glide silently through the darkness across the frozen water. Today's story begins in a quiet corner of southwest Michigan, in the small town of Buchanan, where a narrow ribbon of water winds its way through woods and farmland. The locals call it Hickory Creek. During most of the year, it is an unremarkable stream. It curves lazily through ravines and fields. It passes under narrow wooden bridges. It whispers through cattails and mud. But in winter, Hickory Creek changes. When the cold settles in and the snow begins to fall, the creek freezes solid. And for generations, the frozen surface became a natural skating rink for the children of the town. In the late 1800s, winter skating was one of the greatest joys of childhood. There were no televisions, no video games, no glowing screens to distract a restless mind. There was only the outdoors. And so, when the ice formed thick enough to hold their weight, the children of Buchanan would gather along the banks of Hickory Creek with their skates slung over their shoulders. They would lace the blades onto their boots, push themselves out onto the glassy surface, and race each other down the winding creek. Their laughter echoed between the snow-covered banks. For hours they would glide across the ice, spinning, racing, and daring one another to skate farther and faster. But there was one rule every child in Buchanan knew, a rule repeated by parents, teachers, and older siblings. A rule spoken with just enough seriousness to make it stick. Never skate on Hickory Creek after dark. Because if you did, you might meet the Phantom Skater. Now, the legend of the Phantom Skater had been whispered around Buchanan for as long as anyone could remember. No one seemed to know exactly where the story began. Some said it was older than the town itself. Others believed it first appeared sometime in the mid-1800s, when settlers began carving farms from the forest of Berrien County. But by the time the story reached the ears of Buchanan's children, the details were already well established. The phantom skater was said to appear only on the coldest winter nights, when the moon hung low and pale over the frozen creek. He would arrive without warning. At first, there would only be a sound, a scraping noise, slow, sharp, the unmistakable sound of metal blades cutting into ice. Children who heard the sound would turn, expecting to see another skater approaching behind them. Instead, they would see something far stranger. A towering figure dressed entirely in black. His clothing hung tightly onto his body like a shadow. A dark skull cap covered his head, and beneath him, enormous skate blades flashed across the frozen creek. He moved faster than any human skater ever could, faster than a racing horse, faster than the wind that whipped across the winter fields. As he passed beneath wooden bridges, witnesses claimed sparks flew from his blades, bright flashes of green and blue light streaking across the ice behind him. And as he skated, he laughed, but not the laughter of a man enjoying himself, but a high, shrill cackle that echoed through the ravines like something not quite human. Children who stayed too late on the ice would sometimes swear they heard blades behind them. And that was when the panic began. Skates would be ripped from boots. Children would scramble up the snowbanks, and they would run, breathless, terrified, all the way back to the safety of their homes. Now, for most people, the phantom skater was simply a story, a cautionary tale, a clever invention that was used by parents to make sure their children did not stay out too late on the frozen creek. After all, winter nights in Michigan are dangerous. Temperatures plummet, ice cracks, and darkness falls quickly. For the phantom skater, that moment arrived in the winter of 1888. The witness was a young boy named Harvey Seasongood. Harvey grew up in the Buchanan area during a time when life revolved around farms and small shops and tight-knit communities. And like most boys his age, he spent every winter skating on Hickory Creek. And like every other child in town, he had heard the stories of the phantom skater. The sparks on the ice, the laughter in the dark. But Harvey never believed in the legend. To him, it was nothing more than a ghost story, something adults used to scare children. Well, one cold evening, Harvey and several friends were skating along the frozen creek. The sky had already begun to darken. The light of the setting sun stretched across the snow in long purple shadows. The boys knew they should probably head home, but they kept skating anyway. The ice was smooth that night. It was perfect. And the thrill of gliding through the quiet winter landscape was too good to give up. Eventually, the other boys began drifting toward the banks. Parents would be waiting. Dinner would get cold. So one by one, they climbed the snowy embankments and disappeared into the warm lights of town. But Harvey, well, he lingered behind. He wanted just one more run down the creek, one more burst of speed before the night swallowed the ice completely. So he pushed himself forward, carving long lines across the frozen surface, and that was when he heard it. At first, he thought it was just the echo of his own blades. Harvey slowed. He turned his head and, for a moment, he saw nothing. The creek behind him stretched into the darkness. The banks were empty. The trees stood silent beneath their coats of snow. Harvey shook his head. Maybe the stories were getting to him. He turned forward and again began skating toward the bank. Then the sound came again, louder, closer. Now Harvey knew the sound wasn't his own. Something was skating behind him. Something big. So he pushed harder, racing toward the edge of the creek. But panic has a way of ruining even the simplest escape. As Harvey scrambled up the bank, his coat snagged on a strand of barbed wire stretched between two fence posts. Suddenly he was stuck. The more he struggled, the tighter the wire caught his clothing, and the scraping sound behind him grew louder. Slowly, Harvey turned his head, and that was when he saw it. The figure glided down the frozen creek toward him. At first, it seemed impossibly tall. The longer he stared, the larger it appeared. Now later in life, Harry would claim the skater was nearly 18 feet high, towering over the frozen creek like a black shadow. The figure's body was wrapped in dark clothing that clung tightly to its limbs. A black skull cap covered its head. Its arms swung lazily at its sides as it moved, as if skating required no effort at all. But the most disturbing detail was its feet. Where ordinary skaters had boots and blades, this thing appeared to have hooves, cloven hooves, and fused to those hooves were massive steel blades that sparked violently each time they struck the ice. Green flashes, blue bursts. The creature's skates carved deep, glowing lines across the frozen creek as it approached. Harvey was frozen in fear. He tugged desperately at the barbed wire, but the metal refused to release him. The phantom skater glided closer and closer. Its face remained hidden in the shadow, but Harvey could hear something else now. Laughter. A thin, unnatural giggle that echoed down the frozen creek. The creature passed directly in front of him, no more than a few yards away. And in that moment, Harvey noticed something even stranger. The phantom skater cast no shadow. Now moonlight poured across the snow and ice, but the towering figure that glided along the creek left nothing behind it, not a single shadow. The creature continued to skate forward. Then, as it approached a narrow wooden bridge crossing the creek, it bent its legs, and with a single effortless motion, the phantom skater leapt into the air. It soared completely over the bridge, blades flashing, sparks raining down onto the ice below. And then it landed on the far side, still moving at an impossible speed. Now, within seconds, the dark figure vanished into the winding shadows of Hickory Creek. The scraping sound faded into silence, and the creek was empty once more. Now, Harvey eventually managed to free himself from the barbed wire, and he ran all the way home that night, breathless and terrified. And when he told his family what he had seen, they listened politely. But like many ghost stories told by children, the tale was quietly dismissed. Years passed. Harvey grew older. He built a life in the Buchanan area and eventually became a well-known local businessman. But he never forgot what he saw that night on Hickory Creek. And in 1963, more than 70 years after the encounter, Harvey Seasongood finally told his story to a newspaper reporter. By then, the legend of the Phantom Skater had already faded from public memory, but Harvey insisted that story was real. Now, he described every detail of the creature: the towering height, the hooves, the sparks flying from the ice, and the strange laughter that echoed through the winter's night. Now, some people believed him, others laughed. Skeptics pointed out that Harvey had a reputation for telling colorful stories. In fact, he once claimed to have seen a gigantic bird flying near Hickory Creek as well. To many listeners, the Phantom Skater sounded like the kind of tale that grows larger with each retelling, but something about the story stuck. Because even if Harvey's encounter was exaggerated, the legend itself was much older. Parents had been warning children about the Phantom Skater long before Harvey was born. Which raises an interesting question. If Harvey invented the story, then where did the legend come from? One explanation is simple. The Phantom Skater may have been nothing more than a practical invention, a frightening bedtime story designed to keep children off the frozen creek after dark. And honestly, it worked. Few children were brave enough to skate on Hickory Creek after hearing stories about an 18-foot tall demon racing through the night. But there are other possibilities. Now, some folklorists believe the Phantom Skater may have been inspired by European winter legends brought to Michigan by early settlers. In many old European traditions, winter spirits were said to travel across frozen rivers and lakes. Now, these beings were often described as tall, shadowy figures who moved impossibly fast across the ice. Some were mischievous, some were malevolent, and some were simply watchers in the winter's night. It's possible that fragments of those old stories traveled with immigrants to the American Midwest. Over time, details changed. The setting moved from frozen rivers in Europe to a small creek in southwest Michigan. And eventually, the legend settled into the story locals know today: the Phantom Skater of Hickory Creek. Now, today, Hickory Creek still flows quietly through the countryside near Buchanan, Winters are not quite as brutal as they once were. The creek doesn't freeze as often, and children rarely skate its winding path anymore. But the legend hasn't disappeared completely. Every so often, someone in the area mentions it again. A story told at a campfire, a piece of local folklore shared during the long Michigan winters. Because legends have a strange way of lingering. They hide in quiet places. They wait in old forests and frozen waterways. Legends have a strange way of surviving. Long after the people who first told them are gone, the stories remain. They linger in small towns and quiet woods. They hide in old newspaper clippings and fading memories. And sometimes they drift back into conversation when the conditions are just right. The phantom skater of Hickory Creek is one of those stories. It may have started as nothing more than a warning, a clever way for parents in Buchanan, Michigan to keep their children from skating too late on a frozen creek. Or maybe it grew from something stranger, a fleeting glimpse of something unexplained on a cold winter's night. After all, the story existed long before Harvey Seasongood ever told his story, which means that somewhere in the distant past, someone else must have seen something too. Maybe it was a shadow moving too fast across the lake. Maybe it was the sound of blades scraping through the darkness when no one else was around. Or maybe it was simply the power of imagination working its magic on a moonlit winter landscape. But whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain: Michigan winters are still long, still cold, and still filled with quiet places where old legends refuse to die. Now, most of the year, Hickory Creek looks harmless, just another narrow stream cutting through fields and woods. But occasionally, the temperatures drop low enough for the water to freeze solid again. The ice grows thick, surface turns smooth, and the creek begins to look an awful lot like a skating trail. Now, if you find yourself there on one of those cold winter nights, you might feel tempted to step out onto the ice, to glide through the quiet woods the way the children of Buchanan once did more than a century ago. But if you do, just remember to listen. Because if the night is still enough and the snow muffles the world around you, you might hear something coming out of the darkness behind you. A slow, steady, scraping sound. The sound of blades cutting into ice. And if that sound begins to get closer, you might want to leave Hickory Creek very, very quickly. Because according to legend, the phantom skater still glides down Hickory Creek on the coldest winter nights. And once he starts skating toward you, there's no way to outrun him. Well, hun, I'm going to tell you right now, you're never going to catch me ice skating alone out in the woods on a big old river. Hell no.
Not late at night. No.
No.
This is one of those obscure stories that I've never, ever heard before. and it's kind of an isolated area story. The legend goes back to the 1800s, which I just find is amazing how I've never heard of it before.
Agreed. I've never heard of it before either, and it's kind of unusual.
Yeah.
An ice skating spirit.
Right. And if you think about it, the legend was born of the times, so what were kids doing, during the winter? They weren't playing video games because they didn't have video games back then. So they were out late at night skating and causing a ruckus.
I don't think they were causing a ruckus. They were just playing.
They're kids. They're causing a ruckus.
True. All kids are ruckusing.
But here's the interesting thing. My parents have never tried to frighten me with stories of creatures or monsters to get me in it. I think that the fear of the wrath of my mom was enough to get me home on time. We didn't need the benefit of a monster to scare us home. We had moms.
Right. Well, back then too, there were no street lights to say, hey, when the lights come on.
Right.
And there were a lot of big ass animals back then.
Right.
More, there still are, but you know what I'm saying. A lot more. Wolves, bears.
Yeah. I think a child's imagination can really run crazy too if you're out in the dark and you've already have this story planted in your brain. You hear a strange sound and all it takes is one of your buddies to go, "It's the phantom skater." And you know what? They scatter. They scatter and they panic. And this poor little boy, he gets hung up in the barbed wire of a fence and he's totally freaking out.
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you right now, my dad took us to see Jaws when it first came out at the drive-in. And now, at my age, I can be in the pool by myself, but not when I was a kid and not when I was a teenager.
Oh, you were afraid there was going to be sharks in the pool?
Hell yes. Not sharks, a shark, a big one. So I get it. No, and no.
It's kind of cruel. To do to a child, to scare them with something, to get them to behave,
Well, yeah, and especially because their imaginations are so incredible.
Right.
So I don't like it. It's scary. I can envision it. I don't like it.
Yeah.
So I get it.
It's just a dark figure, but you've got the hooves with the skates. Interesting how that works, but apparently it does.
Exactly. Well, it would keep me coming in at night, that's for sure. Well, great story, hon. I love that you brought something that probably not many have heard at all.
Yeah, it's pretty obscure for sure. Yep.
All right, you want to sign us out?
I sure do. You better lock your doors. You better lock your windows. And you might want to check under your bed.
So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Hey, and we will see you again on Malice Monday.
We'll see you on Monday.